Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime. I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. Let's talk about math and Invincible. Okay, so here's how the video is going to go. We're going to talk about Invincible. We're going to talk about math and how it's used in universe and on the meta level as far as Invincible is concerned. And we're going to talk about, like different elements of it, like voice acting, music, edits, animation, stuff like that. Um, and we're absolutely going to talk about power scaling. Yeah. And I look forward to that. Um, so we're gonna cover the show, which at the time of this recording is 3 seasons, consisting of 8 episodes each, and the Adam Eve special, which is awesome. If you've seen the season but you haven't seen the Adam Eve special, fix that because it is awesome. It's super depressing, but like in a good way. It rocks. But my whole thing is like, right, we have 3 seasons and a special at the time of this recording for Invincible. So spoilers ahead, because I'm not holding back at all. So yeah, I think we should also say spoilers ahead for just Invincible in general, because it is based on a comic, and maybe something from that sneaks its way into here. That realistically won't happen, but if you wanted to be extra safe, I would. Because again, I'm not holding back, and we're gonna go, you know. So with that in mind, spoilers ahead. Let's get into it. So with Invincible, I think it's worth noting that there are a lot of similarities, of course, between our world and Invincible. Now, of course, in their world, they have people with superpowers, people with magic powers, or magical powers, and aliens. So that changes some things, but I want to talk about math on a base level and then expand. So let's talk about math and like um like on the universal level and the academic level, and how that pertains to Invincible and in general, and then again expand. So with math on the academic level, right, it's an extension of what we already do. It's kind of like putting a name to things, right? It's like taking things that we observed and developing the tech. Oh, sorry, I was going to say technology, and you know what? To an extent, but that's a whole other story, right? Well, it's the establishing the vocabulary, figuring out the patterns, being able to make some new conclusions, right? Like, it's supposed to help us make sense of what's already happening, and that's math on the universal level, right? From the subatomic going all the way down to the cosmic. We live in a universe full of shapes and of motion. There's never a point where you're not doing math, right? And we're living in a universe that is constantly in flux, even if you don't feel as though that's the case, right? We're just used to it being constantly in flux, right? And I think that's interesting for a number of reasons. But I bring these things up because, like, on that universal sense, right? There's never any branch of media that isn't using math in its universe. And then on that meta sense, that extends to that too, right? But I think there's like it's worth noting that a lot of the ways that we use math in an academic sense, like the way that most people would think about, that definitely shows up because you're dealing well again with a world that is very similar to ours. Only you have magical powers, you have superpowers, and you have aliens. And so there's always this mad rush to develop this technology, develop this thing. And so there's a lot of math being used in that traditional sense to develop technology. You got a bunch of people who they might realize this thing and that thing, do this equation, do that equation. Solve this problem, solve that problem, and develop this crazy tech. And not only that, there's not only math in that traditional sense, but there's math in the money and in the resources, and the timelines to make this project work, right? And I think that's interesting. And then on the more universal level, right? Like there's math in everything in that world. Whether we're talking about like the buildings you see or how people move, their power sets, you name it. Again, like there's never a point where you're not doing math, right? We live in a universe of shapes and of motion. Invincible is no exception to that, right? And I think that's cool. And one of the big things that I want to talk about throughout this video is power scaling. And again, I said spoilers ahead, so I'm not holding back. But I think power scaling is interesting because, like, if you take, well, because like I think it's fascinating because I think two great examples of how like you see power scaling throughout like the series are like Eve and Mark, right? With Eve, hers is interesting because like we see what she can do. Like we get right, she can control matter on like a level just unseen of, right? Like she's shooting energy, she's changing matter. It's a bonkers thing. And as you could imagine, that can go some places, and we see like her unleashed the full time, like a few times, and notably in season three, you get to see the extent of the kind of damage that she could do, and that was in a weakened state, but able to still unleash her powers, right? And that's wild. Like some of the things that we see, because we see that she can actually damage a Viltrumite, and that Viltrumites are tough enough that that didn't stop them completely. But again, she was in a weakened state when she unleashed her full force at that time, right? Fully healed Eve, we're better watch out, right? Because like the whole thing is like she has like blocks put in place to dampen her power, right? But like in severe situations, her power comes out, and so it's just like interesting to see like how that scales to the current threat. And like seeing that against Conquest was an interesting thing because like that fight was bonkers because we got to see Eve and Mark go all out, but we also see this after they've been through it, and that's worth mentioning too, though, right? Because that colors things to a degree, but it's also just like the Viltrumites are just bonkers in terms of like um, their abilities. And to that end, I do want to talk about like Mark as well, because like we see him get because like with Eve, right? Like we see her. I'll get back to Mark, but I want to say like with Eve, right? We know that she can do some really bonkers things, but she has the dampeners. But we also see her like get more finesse in controlling her powers throughout the series. And she actually goes to college and studies engineering because she feels like that would help her abilities, and that makes a lot of sense, right? And it kind of takes me back to like math, right? Because math is what the universe is doing, right? You don't always write it down, but you're always doing the math. You're not always conscious of it, but you're always doing the math. And like with Eve, she can use her powers. She doesn't have to like physically write out how she's using her powers. She's using them. She knows how they work on an intuitive level. But that doesn't mean like that they're not happening because we see them happening. And something like going back to school for engineering, she's doing using that like we would use school for engineering and like how we would use math, right? It's like we're putting a name to things that we do, right? And we're developing the tools to better understand what we're doing, and that's what Eve was doing, and I think that's really cool. And then with Mark, every now and then Mark does something and it takes actual finesse, but like really a lot of the series is him just getting progressively stronger. And maybe that's an oversimplification, but if you watch, you know how Mark is. But but let's talk about that strength, right? When we first see Mark, right, like he doesn't really have access to his powers, but we see him develop them. And in the first season, he struggles with things like flying and getting used to that. And there's math in him not only flying, but like getting stronger. And I think that's cool, right? And I think like Invincible does a thing with flight that just I think it's done really well because you feel the 3D-ness of it, right? Like if that makes sense. And I like that. So anyway, right? Like we see Mark get stronger, and we see how he stacks up to like other heroes, right? Because for most of the people on Earth, Mark even early on is a challenge for most people, right? Like that's kind of like the level he's operating on by the end of season one, right? He gets really powerful, but at the same time, we see him fight Omni Man, and he gets bodied so hard, and it's very clear that Omni Man is holding back, um, and it goes poorly. But we see Mark putting in the time, and we see him getting stronger. Like we know it's happening. We know like he's overcoming obstacles that once posed a threat to him. And so season after season, we see like the work, but we see things like the Viltrumites, and some of them are still capable of bodying him, right? And it's like just crazy, right? Because like season two, for instance, right? We see that Mark has come a long way. We see how he stacks up to other people, and we see how he stacks up to himself, right? Like we're power scaling, we're paying attention. But even with some of those Viltrumites, it was still brutal. And I remember like the lady who came to her, she bodied that dude. It was bad for Mark. Like she just it was not even a challenge to her. And then like what did she do? Like we see clear evidence of her power, right? We see that she dominates Mark, and she's like, oh, there's someone out there worse than me. And it's like, ooh, ooh, that's not good. And like I think season three is interesting because we see a lot of prep work. We see that in terms of power, right? Like Eve is clearly like the strongest, right? But like she doesn't always have access to her power. So in terms of like people who do, like Mark does a lot, and even with that, even with Eve Unleashed, it was still a struggle with Conquest. But I think the power scaling in that fight is like it's hard to scale in a way, and I say that because like Conquest is clearly very powerful, right? But we are getting an Eve who was weakened, and we're getting a Mark who was weakened. And let's talk about the why. So here's the thing, right? Like, I think one of the craziest things, right? Like, you got the penultimate episode of season three, right? So you know the episode 7 of season three. It feels like a final episode, right? It feels like the ultimate episode, right? Because you have Angstrom, you know, he's back and he brings the different marks from the different realities. So you have like, oh my god, like it's bonkers. You have them like killing hundreds of thousands of people, if not more. And so it is a bonkers things, and they're just destroying buildings left and right. And like we see the scale and scope of the kind of damage that like the alternate universe marks are doing, and it is wild. And so every hero on Earth was like fighting them, and it got crazy. And so Eve was injured in that fight. Mark was exhausted. And so they weren't at their best when they fought Conquest. But I think based on what we saw, still pretty crazy. Like, so you get what I'm saying though? Like, Conquest is powerful, but it's just like, would that battle have gone differently if, Mark and Eve were at full? Because, like, Eve does unleash her, like, full power at that time. But she was in her injured state when she unleashed things, so it's like I feel like that does dampen what she could have done if she had been at full health when she went into that state. And then with Mark, it's like yes, I understand that he heals fast, but it's like there's no way that he was mentally or physically prepared for that fight. But would it have gone that differently? Because like after that fight is done, like and after all the damage is done, like he's still technically living, and it's like Jesus, right? Like, but it was just it's such a bonkers thing because when you have a fight, like in episode 7 of season 3, right? And then it's just like, okay, so what are they gonna do for for episode 8? And it's just like they did not have any room to breathe. So it's like they're out there fighting Conquest, fighting a Viltrumite, and a particularly nasty Viltrumite. And it's like, so what happens? And it paints a very dark picture because it's like that was a struggle, and yes, they won, and maybe they would have done better. I have no doubt that they would have done better if they were at full, but it's just like again, Conquest while he was in bad shape, he was still living, and he was just one though, right? So it's like what happens with the other Viltrumites. So I do like that they continually paint the picture that like things are grim. The Viltrumites are crazy powerful, but like we do see that they can get taken down, right? And it's not just by other Viltrumites. And it's just also like fascinating to like see like the marks from the alternate universe because like our mark seems more powerful than a lot of those ones. But we don't get to see the full scale and scope of them because like some of them got sent away before we could see what kind of damage they could do in full. But it was just like it was a fascinating thing, and also I'm sure some of y'all noticed Mark throughout the seasons he's got some villain type tendencies. and and then when you see these alternate universe versions, like so we see a lot of them in season 3, right? But like we've seen some of them in season 2, and it paints a very bleak picture. Like our Mark is the good Mark. That's messed up in several ways. It's like he's supposed to be the good one. He does some dark things. But in any case, sorry, like it was interesting to see the fight with Conquest because it's like a lot of collateral damage, like in the world that was already being rocked by like several of Mark's alternate universe counterparts. And it wasn't like it was a lot of them. I think it was like close to 20, and they were running roughshod around the world. So it's like interesting to see like the scale and scope of the threats because it was kind of like the marks that we see again, like most of them from what we see aren't as powerful as our version of Mark, right? But we have the idea of what a Viltrumite assault would look like. And again, it's grim. So I do like how we see power scaling throughout the series, and we get to see characters become more powerful. We get to see them like overcome their limitations, but we also get the power scaling working for the future because we see the looming threat in the background, right? The Viltrumites, and it's like they're everybody's problem. So it's like I'm curious, of course, to see how it all ends. In any case, right? There's math, not only in that traditional academic sense, but of course in that universal sense that I mentioned. But there's math that characters are actively using because it's like, yes, that math could look like calculations, right? It can look like different tech being created, but it's also in the fights, right? Right? Because okay, right? You are constantly in motion. You are keeping track of your movements and your distance from your opponent. Like, right? And so you're looking at your distance, their distance, your speed, their speed, and you're timing things appropriately with different combos. You're also measuring your strength against their strength. So not only are we like power scaling, the characters are power scaling too. And each of them have different powers, right? Because it's not all like just, oh, super strength and super speed. There's different items that people are using, and so they're reading the situation and they're adjusting. They're using math in action. Just because they didn't write it down doesn't mean it wasn't math, right? And I think that's an important takeaway. But then, like on the meta sense, there's math in the animation, right? All over it, getting that beautiful motion going. There's math in that animation. There's math not only in the movement that that said animation is indicating, but math in creating it, right? Each and every cell, and all the time that it takes. There's math in the colors, the way light is used, sound, music, and voice acting. And I think that's all awesome. And with said music, before we talk about the voice acting, well, actually, let me back it up. So when it comes to like color and light and sound and all that good stuff, right? They are inherently mathematical. They're parts of our universe, and like them, along with their properties, are inherently mathematical. And how we use them is the same thing, right? And I like that. Um, so Invincible is a very bright show, and light I think is used in some really great ways, and color in general, and I'm here for it. And then as far as sound, if you're talking about sound effects, yes, those are great. But I wanted to also talk about music, um, and in this case, more importantly, voice acting for me. Because look, the music is like pretty consistently decent for Invincible. It sets the tone, it sets the mood for everything. It works. It helps invoke feelings from you, right? It's like sound itself is mathematical, and then with music, you're being more deliberate with how that sound is being used. It's like sound constructed to invoke emotion, sound to set the tone, and I dig it. And then when it comes to voice acting, there's not only math and the voices, and the sound that's being produced, but also how it's coming to you. Every breath, right? Every word is math. And you have these actors using their voices as a tool to project emotion and to help with storytelling. And whether we're talking about the breathing, the actual sound involved, the volumes, the pitch, whatever the case may be, you're dealing with sound in a very deliberate way. And I'm here for it. And voice actors are awesome. And let's talk about like the larger scale thing for Invincible. It has a lot of people in it, and a lot of voice talent there. It's just bonkers. They've gotten so many like different people in it. There's some people who directly from the voice acting world, and there's people like more from an traditional acting world. Sorry, but no matter case, like everyone's doing like a stellar performance, and I think it's like an interesting thing too because like I feel like there was a time where maybe mainstream actors wouldn't have done voice work, and that has changed over the course of time, and I'm absolutely here for that. And I think what I like about Invincible is like it has some people we've come to know from the voice actor world, in addition to more mainstream actors. And so like I think having that combo is good because it's just like, hey, look, if they're good and they're doing their thing, I'm all here for it. And with Invincible, there's no shortage of characters. Um, but what else was I gonna say? Just like I like Invincible. It's a good show. It's like watching it as it airs. On one hand, it's like, oh man, I want it to all be out so I can just watch it all, right? But on the other hand, it's like I do like that the experience. You know, you can come back and each year you're getting something new with that. Well, almost each year because there was a gap. um, not this year, not between season two and season three, but like before. But that's a whole nother thing. But what else was I gonna say? I don't know. Invincible is awesome, and if you haven't seen it, you should. And if you have seen it, you should watch it again eventually. It's still going at the time of recording, and I can't wait to see what they do next. I'll see you in the next one.